Thank you, Joan. Well, the Uganda team tomorrow, now they're 8 hours ahead of us, right? So if you want to pray for them on time, you got to get up real early. But they're going to be at the Jinja Village. I love that name. Jinja Village Medical Outreach tomorrow. So let's be praying for that. They have a little card that's floating around. It's online. So you might want to find that and pray for them each day. All right. So you can go to the slide that has the name or Revelation 17 and 18. This is an action-packed lesson. We're going to cover 17 and 18. However, I'm going to teach out of 17 and read pretty much 18 because 18 is pretty self-explanatory. It's almost like reading a news article after a war. So we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to do is revisit. Oh, by the way, this is Babylon and the Beast. I was thinking of Beauty and the Beast. I was going to have the song playing or something, but I didn't. This is Babylon and the Beast is the title of this particular lesson. So the next slide is the timeline. And again, this is my timeline. As I've said before, Russell and I are in agreement on the what, just a couple of whens that are different. I'm not going to go everything on the timeline, but you see the final 7 years. It starts with a treaty. This is out of Daniel. In the middle, he desecrates the temple. The fireworks go off at the midpoint of the 7 years, and we're going to talk about that today. Then in the last 3.5 years, Jesus called this the Great Tribulation. This is where Russell puts the wrath of God. I put it after the second coming. I put the rapture at the second coming. He puts it at the beginning of the 7 years. But the point today is not to look at that, but to look at Babylon and the Beast. So the next slide reminds you that I think that these visions that John received were given at 4 locations. Remember way back. And at the first one was on the island of Patmos, where he received the vision of the glorified Jesus and the letters to the 7 churches. And then in 4:1, he's taken to heaven before the throne, and that's where we've been for quite a while. This scroll sealed with 7 seals and the trumpets is what I think is the first vision. And the second one are the 3 signs in heaven, which really talks about the conflict. Remember, Satan is cast out of heaven personally, where he's accusing us. He goes down, he's enraged, and through the Antichrist causes all kinds of trouble for the church. In my view, the church is still there. In Russell's view, it's folks that have been saved after the rapture. But in any case, he's after Christians. And now we're at a new location. Why do I think that? Well, the next slide. The next slide is where I put the locations. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but the vision location 1 was not on the timeline. It's in that cloud over there. But vision location 2 in heaven, where we received the visions I just talked about, are all happening during that last 7 years. And today we're into vision location 3, which pretty much starts at the midpoint of that 7 years and goes beyond it. Now the next slide talks about or shows you why I think that we're at a different location. You recall there are some repeated words and phrases. The phrase "in the Spirit" we see, the command to come up here, except the first vision where he wasn't taken anywhere. He stayed on the island of Patmos. Then there's a voice that speaks, either Jesus or an angel. Then the location is given and the contents of the vision. And so to verify the fact that we're at a new location, the next slide looks at the first 2 verses of Revelation 17. And here we go. One of the 7 angels, that's who's speaking, he said, "Come," there's the invitation. "I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute," which is the content of this vision. And it's not only the demise of the prostitute, but all of God's enemies. And you'll see as Russell takes over next week, he just mows down his enemies one after the next. And then at the end of this, verse 3, it said, "I was in the Spirit in the wilderness." And so there we have the repeated words and phrases, and now he's in the wilderness, and we're there with John as he receives this vision. So the next slide pretty much just summarizes Revelation 17 and 18 gives us more details of the Antichrist in Babylon, who they are, and what will happen. Now, in chapters 12 and 13, and especially 13, we got a lot of information about the Antichrist and the false prophet, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Now, the next slide says, what if it were today? You know, you all probably have seen The Chosen. Well, The Chosen isn't a paraphrase, it's not a translation, it's somebody's concept of what happened. And they admit they take some liberties, but it pretty much is a depiction of what happened in theatrical form. Well, I've crafted a page and a half here of what I think is going on in chapter 17. And I've got some names in here, it's all fictitious. But then we're going to go to chapter 17 and see if it backs me up here. But listen to this. The world had long teetered on the edge of chaos. Wars, plagues, and economic collapses had left humanity desperate for order. Then came the global covenant, a total fusion of church and state promising salvation through absolute submission. Its rulers yielded divine authority, backed by ruthless force. To obey meant prosperity. To resist meant death. 5 sovereigns have come and gone, each more tyrannical than the last. The 6th now reigned, High Sovereign Velleius, a man of chilling charisma and merciless will. His laws were scripture, his enforcers, apostles of iron. The world bowed, trembling. Then the unthinkable. An assassin's blade struck true. Velleius fell, gaping wound in his skull, dead before he hit the marble floor. The 7th ruler, Magistrate Darian, seized power amid the chaos. The people whispered, perhaps this is deliverance. But on the 3rd day, the impossible happened. Velleius rose. His body, once cold, now pulsed with eerie vitality. The wound remained, a grotesque testament that yet he lived. The world watched in stunned horror as he strode into the grand basilica, his presence radiating terrifying command. I have returned, he declared, his voice like thunder, not by the will of men, but by the hand of the divine. The covenant shattered under his decree. Governments, religions, all were dissolved in an instant. In their place, a new order arose, the kingdom of the resurrected. Velleius was no longer just a ruler. He was the Messiah, reborn, the only God the world would ever need. Temples were torn down, replaced with his effigy. Scriptures were burned, rewritten in his name. Those who hesitated vanished. Those who knelt were fed. The world stood in awe, some in worship, others in silent terror. For if death could not hold him, what hope had they? So, let's go to chapter 17 and see if it backs up the little thing that I have just read to you. So let's read Revelation 17, 1-6.
One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute, who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon, the great mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished.
All right, so I'm just going to walk through this passage. We'll just leave it up on the screen for you. In verses 1 and 2, we've already read about kind of the introducing the new location. But it says at the end here, the earth was intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. I wrote a note here that all non-Christians will drink the wine. This is going to be worldwide deception. We already saw in chapter 13 that everybody whose name is not written in the book of life will take the mark of the beast, will be deceived and will follow him. Today we're going to get a glimpse on why that's true. Just a quick question. Do you think today people get intoxicated with the wine of sin and stuff? I think so. And I think it's important for those, even, in a subtle way. Satan wants to come in and introduce, kind of lead us away, to tempt us to drink from this cup. And we need to avoid it. In Isaiah 5 it says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and darkness light and light darkness." And then in Romans, Paul says, "Hate what is evil, cling to what is good." And later in this chapter it says, "Christians, come out of her. Don't be involved. Don't drink the wine that she's serving." In verse 3, it says, it introduces us to this Babylon. The woman here is Babylon, we see throughout this chapter, is riding on the beast. Now, whenever we get into symbolic language, it can be confusing, right? And you all know me by now. I try to look at the simplest explanation for things because often it's the right one. Not always, but in this case, I think it is. I think that the woman here is going to represent a worldwide ecumenical evil religion. And it's going to be riding on this beast. And the beast, I think, is the governmental power governing the world. I believe, unlike today, we're trying to separate the two. They are going to one day be united. There's going to be a complete unity of church and state, like it was in the Middle Ages, and that bad things happened when that occurred. And I think it's going to happen again. It's going to be worldwide. And then we're introduced to the 7 heads and 10 horns. So don't worry, we're going to get into them in just a minute. Now, this woman that's talked about here in verse 4, it says she's dressed in purple and scarlet and had glittering gold, precious stones, and she had this cup filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. And you just get this image of this woman. Now, this woman, as I said, is Babylon in this chapter. Babylon is mentioned 287 times in the Bible. And so it's a major theme. We start way back at the Tower of Babel, and you all know the story there. And later there was a nation, an empire called Babylon, and they were ruling the known world at the time, and they're the group that took Judah into captivity for 70 years until the Medes and the Persians took over, and then they were allowed to return. And in the end, there's going to be a new Babylon, and it's going to be Babylon version 2 or something. It's going to be much more powerful and much more evil and going to be worldwide. She had power, wealth, luxury, very anti-God, oppressive and evil. And that's when we look at Babylon through the Bible, that's the image we get of her. And the Babylon in Revelation is going to be the ultimate version of this. Now, this union between the Babylon and the beast, I think, it will be in the future a corrupt, seductive system with religious, political, and economic power that opposes God. Now, Russell and I have both said that in the end, the Antichrist will have complete control over everything. What we're talking about here is before the Antichrist takes over at the midpoint of the 7 years. This union, I think, has been going on for a while, and I'll explain why I think that in just a minute. We have this allusion to purple and scarlet, usually royalty, luxury, sin, gold, jewels, and pearls, or wealth, power, and opulence. And then this cup, is filled with bad things. And, it's like, I get this impression, you taste from this cup and it really tastes good, but it'll kill you. It's like drinking wine with poison in it. It tastes great, but 5 minutes later you're dead. And that's the illusion we get here. This cup is filled with, it's a cesspool. The picture here is a very successful worldwide governing body, but evil, totally evil. And we know who's behind it, right? The last vision we were looking at were the three signs in heaven, the conflict between Satan and God and their forces. And for a while here at the end, it looks like Satan is winning, but he does not. We know that God is victorious. Now let's go to the next slide. And here we have a picture of her. And we're just going to leave that up here. I'll make a couple of comments. It says in verse 5 that this was a mystery. And what was written on her forehead, and you can kind of see there was some printing there, what was written was Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. How would you like to have that written on your forehead? Well, why is this a mystery? Well, some say, well, it wasn't literal Babylon, and I think he was shocked that it was something other than what he had in mind. But it talks about her being the mother or the origin of all idolatry and spiritual adultery. But let's look at this word mystery. The original in the Greek is mysterion. And it means not fully understood at first glance. Not fully understood at first glance, or hides behind something to deceive. And so we have this beautiful woman, which is not a woman, it's a religion riding on the beast that is beautiful and is going to be very seductive and it's going to draw people in. And so, but we know what's behind the curtain. It's evil and it's death. It's not obvious to the understanding. It was hidden for an evil purpose. But in spite of all the glamour, she's nothing but a prostitute. And in the vision, that's what God passes on to John. This is evil, and don't be deceived by what you see. And why on her forehead? Well, in the Roman Empire, believe it or not, if you're a prostitute, if that's your profession, you wore a band on your forehead with your name on it. So if you wanted a prostitute, you just find a woman with a band on her head, and there's her name. And so that's why, in this vision, she has it written on her forehead. Now we have two women in Revelation. Remember chapter 12, we had the woman dressed in the sun, and from her came Jesus. We have in 17, we have this new woman, Babylon, representing Satan's people. So we have, again, the conflict, the image here between the two forces. The woman dressed with the sun brought forth Jesus. Remember back in chapter 12, Satan was ready at the birth to try to destroy Jesus, but failed. And so the woman brought forth Jesus, and this woman is going to bring forth the anti-Jesus, the anti-Christ, the counterfeit Christ. And we're going to see that clearly today. We remember the unholy Trinity. We have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Satan has himself, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, and even their functions were the same. It's quite amazing what he's going to try to do. They are antagonists. This is a war. Now in verse 6, remember, this is before the Antichrist takes over. It says that Babylon was drunk with the blood of the saints. And so for some time, Babylon has been killing Christians. And so this is not something that starts with the Babylon or the Antichrist takeover. She's already drunk with the blood. And then he said, when I saw her, I was astonished. The mystery is being rolled back in John's mind. John is amazed, maybe also because usually persecution comes from the pagan society, right? Not from religion. But here, a religious entity is causing the persecution, even though she has been exposed to him as being vile and evil. And false religion, it's often been perpetrated the most persecution on the true church, on Christians. That's happened for sure in the past. And so we have now an introduction to Babylon and this union between Babylon and the beast. And as we go through this chapter, the beast is represented as kind of the governmental institution from which the Antichrist springs. And so we're going to read more about that. So now let's read chapter 17, verses 7 to 11.
Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was, and now is not, is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction."
Now, this is a passage that causes a lot of minds to spin when they read it because there's a lot going on in these verses. And I want to explain to you here in the next few minutes what I think is going on here. And this may sound a little odd, but I don't think it's that complicated. So let's just walk through it. It says, "The angel said to me, 'Why are you astonished? I will explain the mystery.'" So the interpretation is coming of the beast, of the woman and the beast. I want to, in my view, point out who the main character in this chapter is. Now, most of the words are written about Babylon, but I don't think Babylon is the main character in this chapter. I think the Antichrist is, and I think you'll see why I believe that as we go forward. Remember, this religious entity, Babylon, this filthy religious entity, is riding on the beast. Tyrants have often used religion to accomplish their goals, and we're going to see that to be true. Now, it says, "The beast which you saw once was." Now, I think here, this is maybe a little confusing, but the beast is talking about the governmental institution, but here we're transitioning, I think, to a person. Because it says, "The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction." Now in Daniel, we read about the Daniel 70th week. It's going to start with a covenant with many. He's going to desecrate the temple in the middle, and he's going to his destruction at the end of the 7 years. And now here, I think, is an allusion again to the Antichrist's resurrection. We've already seen it 3 times in chapter 13 that Russell taught. In verse 3, it says, "One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast." I mean, that would do it for a lot of people to see a resurrection. And then in verse 12, it says, "It," meaning the false prophet, "exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed." And then in 14, it says, "Because of the signs it was given power to perform," this is the false prophet again, "sign to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who had been wounded by the sword, yet lived." And so 3 times in chapter 13 we read it, and now here again we have an allusion to this death and resurrection. Now, whether the Antichrist really dies or not is, I think, irrelevant. I don't think Satan can raise people from the dead, but God can. It could be a fake resurrection as well. We don't know for sure. But the point is, the world believes it. It doesn't matter whether he dies or not. What really matters is the world believes it, and the deception is complete. And they're going to just bow down to his image. And then this ends with, again, the reminder that regardless of what goes on, he's going to his destruction. His doom is sure, as prophesied in Daniel 9:27. And then it goes on in verse 8. It says, "The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished." And here's another reference to all the non-Christians on the earth. They are going to be deceived and they're going to be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. Again, the allusion to the death and resurrection. And who wouldn't be amazed, right? If that happened today, I mean, you and I would probably go, no, what's going on there? But the world would be astounded by that kind of thing. I mean, Jesus rose from the dead. He rose other people from the dead, the disciples. So it's happened, and it is pretty amazing when that happens. And then it says, this calls for a mind of wisdom. So we all have minds of wisdom here this morning, because we're going to talk about the 7 heads now. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now, I'm going to just talk about this word hills for a second. There are different opinions on what this represents. The NIV and the NLT version use the word hills. All the others use the word mountain. And this, to many, is an allusion to Rome. Rome was built on 7 hills. And so we've got that going on, right? Something about Rome. Now, a lot of people therefore believe that it's a revived Roman Empire or many other things. It could also just be that Rome was the ruling body in John's day, so it might be a different ruling body later on. But let's look at this word mountain for a second. The word is oros, O-R-O-S, and this word literally means to raise up, to elevate, or to lift up. Now, a mountain is that, right? A hill is that. It's been lifted up. But it's really talking about, like a mountain, something has, or someone has been lifted up, elevated, or raised up. And in Scripture even, mountains are often referring to rulers or nations. So there could be a dual prophecy going on here, which happens frequently. So let's look at these 7. I'm going to read verse 10 and 11, and we're going to come back to it, because this is the riddle, and it can be confusing to people. They are also, besides being 7 hills, they are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. So there again we have the allusion to the death and resurrection. So who are these kings? And I think we need to keep in mind the context of this chapter. This chapter is all about a coup. And we're going to see that very clearly as we go on. When the Antichrist has his death and resurrection experience, he's going to change the world in a very short amount of time. So one option here is that these kings represent nations in the history of our history. A lot of people believe that the first world, the 5 that have fallen, are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. The one that is John's day, Rome. The one who comes for a short time refers to the world empire that we're looking at, and the 8th would be the Antichrist's new reign after he comes back from the dead. And that could be. I don't think personally it's the main focus of what he's talking about here. There could be a dual prophecy, but I'm going to tell you now what I think is going on here, and in my mind it's not all that complicated. Let's go to the next slide. And this is what I think is happening. And as you look at this, I'm going to read it again, and we'll see if this makes sense to you. By the way, these are the rulers of Babylon. There are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. They have served their terms. 1 is the Antichrist. The other has not yet come, who will be the 7th ruler. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. Now, remember the death and resurrection of the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the 6th one. He's killed. The 7th one comes into power for a short time. And I think it's probably 3 days. The beast who once was the Antichrist and now is not, is dead, is the 8th king after the resurrection. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. And so in my mind, that makes sense to me. This Babylon union, the beast in the Babylon, has been going on for a while. This is not new. They're drunk with the blood of the saints, and they've had 5 rulers. And I don't know what a term is in Babylon in the future, but it's going to be a period of time. And so there's some history to this union that's been going on. And the Antichrist is the ruler, I believe, at the beginning of the 7 years. Remember, at the beginning, there's a treaty with many. And most of us believe that the Gog War is going to happen just before that, and it's a major conflict, and the Antichrist in Daniel says he will step forward and create a covenant, probably a peace treaty. And if he's the king of Babylon, that would make sense. And so he would be in rule then up through that last 7 years until at the midpoint something dramatic happens. Now, you can read that over, and you can believe that it's nations, and it may be nations in history. It could be a dual prophecy. But for me, this makes a lot of sense, because chapter 17 is all about the future overhaul of the world system, and we're going to see that in just a few minutes. So the conclusion is, I don't believe that the primary reason for these 7 kings is a historical retrospective. I think it's future focused on 7 literal kings that will rule Babylon in the future, leading up to the Antichrist and his takeover of the world. Now, you can mull on that for a minute. And the next slide asks the question, who are the 10 kings? Because we have these 7 kings that are the rulers of Babylon leading up to the Antichrist's death and resurrection experience. But now we have 10 kings. And we're going to read the final verses of chapter 17, 12 to 18.
The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth.
All right, thank you. So now we have the other reason I think that the 7 are kings is now we have 10 kings. There's a continuity here in this passage from pre-Antichrist rule to post-Antichrist rule. So here now we have these 10 kings. They have not yet received a kingdom, but they're going to be involved in the coup, in the takeover. There's a new world order coming. And so this beast Babylon thing that's been entity that's been ruling for some time is going to be demolished, and the Antichrist is going to set up a new structure, and we're going to talk about that. Then there's this comment about they will wage war with the Lamb. That's Jesus. I think that this passage here, that this is maybe a preview of the Battle of Armageddon that's coming. There's a spiritual battle going on this entire time, as we've seen. In chapter 12, we saw the 2 women and Satan and God having conflict, and Satan's cast out of heaven, and there's just a lot of spiritual battle going on that's being manifested in physical form. And later, the Battle of Armageddon will be fought, which is going to be in the next chapter next week. And so that may be an allusion to that. But the point here is, regardless of how bad things look, God is going to win. And this is going to be a short time when it looks like Satan is winning, but ultimately he does not. And then he said, in verse 15, he says, the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits. In other words, this global rule is everybody, all peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. This is global. This is not going to be, oh, I'm surprised. Everybody will know who this is. And Then we get into the 10 horns, this takeover. These 10 horns have not yet received their power or their kingdoms, but they're waiting. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. It's very graphic. This is going to be a quick and vicious takeover. And the true colors of the Antichrist will come out to the world at this point. And Babylon, for sure, will be shocked at. First of all, the Antichrist has come back to life, and they may first be thinking, "Oh, good, we have a new religious leader," but then he's going to turn on her. And we know in Scripture, in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4, it says, "The son of perdition," this is talking about the Antichrist, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And this is the desecration that Daniel talked about. He has come back to life. He's been raised from the dead. He's sitting in the temple in Jerusalem, and he's desecrating it, and he won't put up with anybody else except himself to be worshipped. And the Antichrist now no longer needs Babylon. In fact, cannot tolerate Babylon, because Babylon is no longer the focus of worship. He is, and he will destroy her and her one world religion. In 17 it says, "For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose," this is the 10 kings, "by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled." And so there's a coup. This beast Babylon entity has been destroyed quickly. It says in 1 hour, brought down, and the Antichrist has come back to life. He desecrates the temple. He sets himself up as the Messiah to be worshipped, the image that speaks and the whole deal, and he creates a new ruling body with these 10 kings over the world. But here it's the first few verses of this, or words of this verse. "For God has put it in their hearts." God will direct this judgment. This is not random. This is God directed. God has used wicked nations to punish other wicked nations throughout history, and he's going to do it again. He's going to use the 10 kings, a wicked group, to punish Babylon, another wicked group. And God is going to give them what they desire, godless religion and a godless ruler. And then it ends with, "The woman you saw is the great river the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." Again, Rome was the great city at that point, but it's referring to Babylon as being a ruler at one point over the entire world until she's brought down and destroyed. Now, the next slide asks the question, we all have to ask this. Does something reign over you other than Jesus? And it's easy to let some of those things into our life. And this is just something that we should all think about. There should be nothing between us and God that would divert our worship of him. And in this case, the whole world is going to follow the Antichrist and worship him. In Isaiah 42, it says, "I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols." And so it doesn't matter how bad things look, God is going to be victorious. Now, the next slide is the destruction of Babylon. Now, I don't have time to read the entire chapter. I'm going to read part of it. Chapter 18 is the aftermath. And I'll just read a couple of parts of it. And in fact, go back to the previous slide. Just listen instead of following along up there, because I'm going to skip some of it anyway. "After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons, a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich with her excessive luxuries. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, have nothing to do with her, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Let her drink her own wine. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn. Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her." And you can read on in that chapter. It goes on and on with details about the demise of Babylon and how the world is just shocked and in mourning. And then, would you go past the scriptures? Yeah. I say, out of the dust of destruction emerges the risen Antichrist, who will reign supreme for 3.5 years. So with all this mourning and anguish and this turmoil, he's going to step forward and say, "Don't worry about it, people. I've got this." And he's going to reign supreme for 3.5 years over the world until his destruction comes, which we see next week. It's sobering, is it not? And even if you don't understand everything there, it's, I think the important thing to me, it's like, boy, things are going to be bad. But God is in control. He orchestrates it. And one day he will reign supreme, regardless of what we see happening around us. Thank you.